Do you think living in a castle would be like a fairy tale? Spoiler, it's not. You wake up, or rather you are brutally ripped from what could generously be called sleep, by a sensation that has become as familiar as breathing. Something is moving in your bed. Many things, actually. No, it's not your feverish imagination. They're fleas, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, having a Dionysian feast on what remains of the straw that serves as your mattress. The straw, which was once golden and aromatic about 6 months ago when it was last changed, is now a dark, damp, and compact mass that exudes a delicious perfume of ancestral mold, rancid sweat, crystallized urine, and something you genuinely prefer not to identify but suspect is of animal origin, or human, or both. Congratulations, you woke up in a medieval castle. Good luck with that. The cold hits you like an icy dagger straight to the chest. The stone walls around you weren't built for comfort. They were erected to intimidate, endure, and apparently suck any trace of human warmth from the environment. Each stone seems to have been carefully selected for its capacity to radiate deadly coldness. You're not prepared for this. The wind doesn't just whistle through the cracks between the stones. It howls, moans, and whispers threats in languages you don't recognize, creating a melancholic symphony that makes you question not just your life choices, but existence itself. Oh, wait, you didn't have life choices. You were born here, in this era, in this place abandoned by God. What cosmic bad luck. Your eyes struggle to adjust to the weak and dirty light that crawls through an opening in the wall that can technically be called a window, but in practice is just a strategic hole. Without glass, obviously. Glass was for nobles, kings, people who mattered. You are none of these things. In fact, you're so insignificant in the great feudal food chain that even the rats look at you with a mixture of pity and superiority. The window is covered by a piece of cloth that one day, in an era lost in time, might have been white or beige. Now it's a color that doesn't exist in the normal visible spectrum, a mixture of brown, gray, and hopelessness that flutters sadly like a flag of unconditional surrender to life. You try to sit up and discover that your entire body is a symphony of pain. Every muscle, every joint, every fiber of your being screams in silent agony. This was considered absolutely normal, believe it or not. Sleeping on a surface that has the consistency of medieval concrete, covered by rotting hay and diverse insects, isn't exactly what any sensible person would recommend for a restorative night. But sensible people are a luxury that doesn't exist in your universe. Actually, luxury in general is an alien concept around here. The smell. Holy God, the smell. It's an olfactory work of art that combines human sweat, aged for decades, cheese that has reached an almost philosophical state, of decomposition, crystallized despair, excrement of multiple origins, and something that might have been food at some point in human history, but now defies any known classification. You try to breathe through your mouth in the naive hope of escaping the nasal assault, but this only manages to make the situation drastically worse, because now you can taste the air. It's like licking the inside of a septic tank that has been used by generations of people with severe digestive problems. Romantic, isn't it? From somewhere in the labyrinthine depths of the castle, sounds echo that would transform nightmares into pleasant dreams. A muffled scream that cuts through the air like a blade. The metallic and deliberate dragging of heavy chains. Someone crying uncontrollably or perhaps laughing hysterically. After a few months here, you learn that the line between despair and madness is thinner than wet paper. The sounds don't just echo through the stone walls, they reverberate, multiply, transform into something supernatural, as if the castle itself were a living organism fed by human misery. You examine your hands in the weak light, and what you see is almost artistic in its repugnance. They're dirty, but not with the honest dirt of someone who worked in the garden or fixed something useful. It's an archaeological layer of existential dirt that seems to have become an integral and permanent part of your molecular structure. Your nails are black as coal, your palms rough as medieval pumice stone, and there's something solid and suspicious under each nail that you genuinely don't want to examine more closely, but that your morbid curiosity insists on mentally cataloging. Your feet touch the floor, and you feel the cold and damp stone through what an optimist would call footwear. 2 leather strips that one day in prehistory protected your feet and now serve more as a melancholic reminder of times when you had hope. The floor isn't just cold, it's damp with a dampness that defies explanation. Always damp. Eternally damp. You wonder if ever, at some point in the history of this cursed place, someone woke up and said, "Wow, what a dry and cozy floor." Spoiler, definitely not. Reality begins to crystallize in your mind, like ice forming in a puddle. You are, in fact, in a medieval castle, but there's absolutely nothing glamorous about it. You're not the magnanimous king, nor the delicate princess, nor even the gallant knight mounted on a white steed. You are, to use a precise technical term, absolutely nobody. A serf, possibly, or a disposable soldier, or just another warm body to fill space and work until you die from some disease with an unpronounceable name and symptoms that would make you beg for death long before it arrives. Heavy footsteps echo in the corridor outside, each beat a declaration of authority. Military boots hammering the stone with the rhythm of an imminent execution. Someone is approaching, and by the sound of the steps, heavy, deliberate, relentless, this person is not only not in a good mood, but is probably looking for someone to take their irritation out on. In fact, nobody is ever in a good mood here. Good mood is a luxury reserved exclusively for people who don't have the misfortune of existing in medieval castles. The first and most crucial lesson you learn quickly: hierarchy is literally all that matters. And you, my friend, are so far at the end of the line that you can't even see the beginning of it. There's the king, then the lords, then the knights, then the rich merchants, then the artisans, then the free peasants, then the serfs, then the slaves, then the domestic animals, then the rats, and only then, at the very absolute end of existence, there's you. You try desperately to remember how the hell you got here. Were you born in this frozen hell? Were you captured as a prisoner of war? Did you lose a cosmically bad bet with fate? Did you offend some ancient god? It doesn't matter anymore. What matters, with painful clarity, is that you're here now, and here is a place where life expectancy is generously measured in weeks, not years, and where each new day is a death lottery disguised as routine. A drop of ice-cold water falls from the ceiling directly onto the top of your head, slowly trickling down your forehead like a cosmic tear. Then another, and another. The ceiling is leaking abundantly. Of course it is. Building maintenance wasn't exactly a priority in the Middle Ages. In fact, the concept didn't even exist. You look up and contemplate dark stains spreading across the stone like ink in an apocalyptic watercolor. It could be rainwater. It could be sewage. It could be blood from some questionable activity happening on the upper floors. Honestly, you prefer not to know, but your mind insists on cataloging the possibilities. The footsteps are dangerously close now. You hear rough male voices discussing something in low and threatening tones that make your blood freeze in your veins. A sinister and genuinely frightening laugh echoes through the corridor, followed by more voices joining the fun. Someone is clearly having fun with someone else's intense suffering. This was also considered perfectly normal and acceptable entertainment. You urgently need to get out of this infested bed. You need to face the day that announces itself. You need to heroically pretend that you're prepared for another 12 to 16 uninterrupted hours of heavy physical work. Food of dubious quality and constant psychological terror. You're definitely not prepared for this. But prepared or not, wanting it or not, the day has officially begun. And your first challenge of the day? Apparently simple, but challenging in practice, finding an appropriate place to perform your most basic physiological needs. Because delightful surprise, there's no private bathroom in your room. In fact, the revolutionary concept of privacy simply doesn't exist anywhere in this castle or this era. Welcome officially to your first day in medieval paradise. Spoiler, it definitely doesn't end well. Oh, you need to use the bathroom? How adorable. Prepare yourself for an experience that will completely redefine your concept of human dignity. You leave your room following a smell that can only be described as death in decomposition seasoned with despair. The stone corridor echoes your steps as you desperately search for something that remotely resembles a bathroom. Spoiler, you're not going to like what you find. After a few minutes of fruitless searching, you finally locate what the inhabitants of this castle affectionately call the necessary, a term that is simultaneously accurate and tragically ironic. It's a small projection on the external wall of the castle, a kind of stone balcony with a strategically positioned hole. Below this hole, at a distance that should be comforting but definitely isn't, there's a moat, a deep, dark, and aromatic moat that accumulates the waste of all the castle's inhabitants since the beginning of time. You're not prepared for this. The cabin, and I use the term with extreme generosity, has no door, obviously. Privacy is a concept that will only be invented in a few centuries. Anyone passing through the courtyard can admire you in your most vulnerable moment. And they do admire, believe me. Some even comment on your technique. This was considered social and perfectly acceptable. You position yourself carefully over the wooden plank that was once smooth but is now rough, stained, and with some splinters strategically positioned to maximize your discomfort. The hole is larger than you expected, which initially seems like good news, until you realize this means splashing is not only possible, but statistically inevitable. Toilet paper? Ha ha ha, forget it completely. This is an invention that will still take several centuries to appear. Your options are limited but creative. Leaves from plants that you hope aren't. Poisonous, pieces of cloth that someone has already used for other questionable purposes, or simply use your left hand and hope to find something to clean it with afterward. The left hand, by the way, will become your exclusive personal hygiene tool. The right is for eating. Never ever confuse the two. The smell rising from the moat is an olfactory masterpiece that combines centuries of human waste fermenting under sun, rain, and snow. It's an aroma that transcends description. Imagine the worst smell you've ever experienced in your life. Multiply by 1,000, add notes of rotten fish and melted Limburger cheese, and you'll still only be approaching reality. You try to hold your breath, but eventually you need to breathe. And when you do, you're certain your taste buds just died. But wait, there's more. From time to time, you hear something moving down there. Rats? Possibly. Something bigger? Probably. You prefer not to investigate. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Having finished this traumatic experience, you need to deal with the issue of hand cleaning. Clean water? What a revolutionary concept. There's a barrel with water next to the necessary, but the water has a color that doesn't exist in nature, and small things floating that you suspect were alive once. You wet your hands anyway, because the alternative is worse, and rub them with a piece of soap that's more sand than soap, and that leaves your hands rougher than before. Now that you've solved a basic need, it's time to face the next shocking reality. You stink. Not a little. You stink like something that died, was buried, dug up by wild animals, left in the sun for a week, and then used as a nest by sick rats. Bath? What an enchanting concept. If you have extraordinary luck, you might get a bath once a year. Once per year. And bath is a generous term to describe the process of being partially submerged in water that has already been used by dozens of other equally stinking people before you. The water is cold, obviously, brown with dirt and other substances, and contains a variety of microorganisms that science hasn't discovered yet. The soap is made from ashes and animal fat, not the good fat, but the leftovers that nobody could turn into food. It's rough as pumice stone and removes not only dirt, but several layers of skin along with it. After the bath, you feel like you've been attacked by a particularly aggressive bear. Your teeth are another completely different horror story. Dental brushing, toothpaste, dental floss, concepts that won't exist for many centuries. Your teeth, which were once white at some point in your distant childhood, are now a fascinating palette of browns, yellows, and blacks. Some are loose, others have simply disappeared, leaving painful holes that accumulate food remains and get infected regularly. Your breath is a biological weapon. Literally. When you speak, small animals flee, plants wither. People genuinely recoil in horror. You try chewing herbs to improve the situation, but the only herbs available are bitter and make you salivate uncontrollably, which somehow makes everything worse. Your clothes? Ah, your precious clothes. You're wearing the same clothes for how long exactly? Months? Years? The clothes literally never come off your body. You sleep in them, work in them, sweat in them, and occasionally are buried in them. The clothing washing technique exists, technically, but involves beating wet clothes against stones in the river until they're only slightly less dirty than before. The result is that your clothing has developed its own ecosystem. There are things living in the fabric fibers. Small insects have made nests in the pockets. Stains of unknown origin have created interesting artistic patterns. The clothing has become so stiff from accumulated dirt that it could stand on its own if you got out of it. And then we have your most faithful companions, lice. They live in your hair, in your clothes, in your bed, and occasionally organize exploratory expeditions through the rest of your body. You can feel them moving, especially at night when everything is quiet. It's like having tenants who never pay rent and constantly throw parties. Scratching has become an art. You've developed sophisticated techniques to reach specific points without seeming completely crazy. But everyone scratches, so actually you fit in perfectly. An entire society of people scratching simultaneously, it's almost poetic. Lice aren't your only hair companions. There are also fleas, which are more adventurous and like to travel through your body looking for new territories to colonize. And occasionally, if you're very lucky, ticks that attach themselves with the determination of medieval creditors. You try to clean yourself as you can, using methods that would be considered torture in more civilized times. You scrub your skin with rough cloths until it's red and bleeding. You pluck lice manually, one by one, in a war you'll never win. You try to wash parts of your body in cold water that leaves you shivering for hours. But the cruel reality is that no matter what you do, you'll continue stinking like something that should have been dead long ago. Everyone stinks. It's the characteristic aroma of the era, a collective fragrance of unwashed humanity that hovers over the castle like a permanent toxic cloud. Good luck with that. Your stomach growls like an irritated wild animal, cruelly, reminding you that despite all the traumatic morning experiences, you still need to feed yourself. What an adorable idea. Prepare to discover how to transform the first meal of the day into an experience that will make you consider perpetual fasting as an attractive option. You follow the smell of food and use the term food with all possible generosity through the damp corridors of the castle. The aroma guiding your steps is a complex mixture of rancid fat, something burning that should have been thrown away weeks ago, and a subtle touch of culinary despair. It's as if someone had tried to cook using only ingredients that were already bad to begin with. The common room where meals are served is a spectacle of civilization in decline. Dark wooden tables, stained by decades of spilled food, occasional blood, and other substances you prefer not to mentally catalog. The benches are long, hard, and occupied by people who seem to have come directly from your worst nightmares. And you realize, with growing horror, that you probably look exactly the same to them. First gastronomic surprise. Your morning drink isn't coffee. Coffee doesn't even exist yet in your geographical reality. It's also not orange juice, fresh milk, or crystal clear water. It's beer. Beer for breakfast. Weak beer, true, but still beer. And before you make any joke about what a good life, now let me explain. You drink beer because water can literally kill you. The available water is a bacteriological masterpiece that contains more deadly microorganisms than a medieval biological warfare laboratory. Drinking water is like playing Russian roulette, but with much worse odds. Beer, fermented and with enough alcohol to kill at least some of the microscopic assassin creatures, is technically the safer option. This was considered logical and sensible. You receive a wooden cup, not your personal exclusive cup, but a communal cup that has already been used by dozens of different mouths. This morning, mouths with rotten teeth, bleeding gums, breath that could knock down a horse, and an impressive variety of contagious diseases. The cup has a layer of something sticky on the rim that could be dried saliva, spilled beer, or more sinister substances. The beer itself tastes like water, flavored with moldy bread, and has a slightly viscous texture that makes you wonder what exactly was fermented to create this liquid masterpiece. There are small pieces floating, unfiltered grains, you hope. They're grains, and occasionally something that moves on its own. You drink anyway because the alternative is death by dehydration or poisoning from contaminated water. Now, let's move to the main course, bread. Medieval bread. If you imagine something golden, soft, and aromatic coming out of a cozy oven, prepare for a disappointment that will redefine your expectations about carbohydrates. The bread placed in front of you has the consistency of poorly cured concrete and the color of something that has been dead for a considerable time. This bread was made with flour that contains not only wheat, if you're lucky, but also rye infected with hallucinogenic fungi, barley with weevils, and occasionally other substances added to increase volume. These substances include sawdust, which adds interesting fiber, and sometimes flour from ground bones of animals of questionable origin. You try to bite the bread and almost break a tooth. Literally, the bread is so hard it needs to be soaked in beer for several minutes before becoming remotely chewable. Even so, it's like chewing sand seasoned with hope. Some people have developed sophisticated techniques for sucking the bread until it softens enough to be swallowed, a process that can take half an hour and produces sounds that would make you question human dignity. But wait, there are more culinary delights waiting for you. Porridge, a bowl of gray porridge that seems to have a life of its own, made with oats that have seen better days, milk that may or may not have come from a healthy animal, and water of dubious quality. The porridge has a texture that defies description. It's simultaneously liquid and solid, smooth and grainy, hot and cold in different parts of the same spoonful. And here's the highlight of the gastronomic experience: extra protein. Small dark dots move slowly through the porridge. Larvae. Small, fat, and apparently nutritious larvae that found in your breakfast the perfect environment to develop. You're not prepared for this, but everyone around you eats normally, fishing out the larvae with dirty fingers or simply swallowing everything together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Adds flavor, explained someone beside you, a man with 3 remaining teeth and a smile that would haunt children for generations. And protein. Protein is good. He demonstrates by fishing out a particularly fat larva and chewing it with evident pleasure. The sound is exactly what you imagine it would be. Meat is also available, technically speaking. A piece of something that was once part of an animal. Which animal is an open question. It might have been pig, cow, goat, horse, or something you prefer not to speculate about. The meat has a color that doesn't exist in nature and a texture that suggests the animal might have died from unnatural causes quite some time ago. The meat preparation followed advanced culinary methods. It was left hanging in an environment without refrigeration until it developed an interesting external crust, then cooked over fire fed by diverse organic substances until it was simultaneously burned on the outside and raw on the inside. The result is a gastronomic experience that challenges both the palate and the digestive system. Seasonings exist, theoretically. Salt is more valuable than gold, literally, so it's used with extreme parsimony. The available herbs were harvested from questionable places by people who may or may not have knowledge about which plants are edible versus which are hallucinogenic versus which are lethal. It's a botanical lottery in every meal. You need to eat all this with your hands, your dirty hands, which just dealt with physiological needs and weren't adequately washed because clean water is a non-existent luxury. Forks are for rich nobles, and even then they're rare. Knives exist, but are shared among several people and have never been properly washed since they were forged. Social etiquette requires you to share utensils with strangers. The same knife you use to cut your dubious meat just finished being used by someone with open wounds on their hands. The same spoon you use for porridge just finished being in the mouth of someone with a productive cough that sounds like they're slowly dying from some medieval lung disease. Everyone eats from the same central bowl. Dirty hands plunge into communal food, sick mouths blow over shared food, and occasionally someone sneezes directly onto common dishes. This was considered normal and social. The idea of germs or cross-contamination won't exist for many centuries. You observe the people around you chewing with their mouths open, not out of bad manners, but because many don't have intact lips or enough teeth to keep their mouths properly closed. The sound is a symphony of wet chewing, sucking, occasional choking, and conversations conducted with mouths full of semi-digested food. Someone near you discreetly vomits on the floor and continues eating as if nothing happened. Wild dogs and cats circle the tables, competing for scraps that fall on the floor with audacious rats and occasionally with the people themselves. A particularly brave cat jumps on the table and starts eating directly from the communal dish. Nobody stops it. The concept of fresh food is fascinating in the medieval era. Fresh means died only recently or hasn't yet developed its own consciousness. Fresh vegetables are those that were harvested in the same season and still maintain some resemblance to their original form. Fresh meat is that where you can still identify which part of the animal it came from. Food preservation involves revolutionary techniques, like leaving everything to dry in the sun until it turns to leather, burying things in salt until they mummify, or simply hoping that winter cold keeps food frozen enough not to become toxic before being consumed. You finish your meal, or at least stop eating when your stomach threatens to rebel completely, and wonder how anyone survives this lifestyle for more than a few weeks. The answer is simple. Many don't survive. Life expectancy is low for many reasons, and medieval cuisine certainly contributes significantly to the grim statistics. Good luck with digestion. You're going to need all the luck possible because your digestive system is about to face challenges that would make a modern stomach surrender immediately. And the best part? You have to repeat this gastronomic experience 3 times a day, every day, for the rest of your presumably short life. Welcome to medieval breakfast. Spoiler, lunch won't be better. With your stomach making worrying noises and a growing sensation that you may have just voluntarily poisoned yourself, it's time to discover what your productive contribution to this charming medieval society will be. Spoiler, it doesn't matter what your position in the feudal hierarchy is, you're going to suffer. The only difference is the specific type of misery that awaits you. If you're a serf, And statistically, this is your most probable reality. Congratulations. You just won the slavery lottery with extra benefits. You're not technically someone's property, which means they can't legally sell you. What generosity. Instead, you're just eternally tied to the land, unable to leave, obligated to work for a lord who considers you slightly more valuable than cattle. And that's only on good days. Your workday begins before sunrise and ends when it's already too dark to distinguish a hoe from a serpent. This means approximately 16 hours of intense physical work, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, until you die from exhaustion, disease, or work-related accident. Vacations. What an enchanting and completely non-existent concept. You receive a hoe that has already been used by generations of previous serfs, all dead now, obviously. And that has a handle so worn it's literally molded by the desperate hands of hundreds of people who previously wielded this tool. The metal blade is dull, rusty, and occasionally loose, transforming each movement into a potentially fatal adventure. Your first job of the day, plowing the field. This would be simple if you had adequate equipment, cooperative soil, and a healthy draft animal. You have none of these things. The plow is a pointed piece of wood tied to an ox that has clearly seen better days and seems to be questioning its own life choices. The soil is hard as concrete when dry and transforms into an impossible viscous paste when wet. You spend hours trying to make straight furrows, while the ox decides it prefers eating grass to working, occasionally stopping in the middle of the field to contemplate existence or produce manure in impressive quantities. Your hands develop blisters that rupture and bleed, then form calluses over the open wounds, creating a rough surface that eventually becomes your new permanent skin. If, by some cosmic miracle, you're not a serf, but a soldier, your career options are equally charming. You receive armor that has already been used by at least 3 previous soldiers, all killed in combat naturally, and that doesn't fit your body in any way. It's too heavy to move comfortably, too light to offer real protection, and has holes strategically positioned exactly where you'd most need protection. Your weapon is a spear with an iron point that's duller than a spoon, and a wooden shield that has already been partially eaten by termites. Your military training consists of learning not to die immediately when someone tries to kill you, a skill you'll discover is surprisingly difficult to master when you're not literally fighting for your life in battles you don't understand, against enemies you've never met, for causes nobody can adequately explain. You spend time in military exercises that were designed specifically to be as uncomfortable and humiliating as possible. Forced marches, carrying heavy equipment through impossible terrain, combat training against opponents who genuinely want to hurt you, and military strategy classes taught by commanders who clearly learned everything they know through trial and error, mostly error. But maybe you've had extraordinary luck and are a noble. How wonderful! This means that instead of heavy physical work, you have the privilege of dealing with medieval politics, which is basically like playing chess, except all the pieces are trying to assassinate you and the rules change constantly without prior notice. Your day begins with endless meetings with other nobles who smile politely while planning your death. Apparently civilized conversations about taxes, harvests, and alliances that are actually complex negotiations about who will betray whom first. Each word is carefully chosen because saying the wrong thing can result in accusations of treason, which in turn result in creative and publicly humiliating execution methods. Regardless of your social position, there's a universal constant: punishments. Oh, the punishments are truly works of art in creative cruelty. Arriving late to work, public flogging, questioning an order, more flogging. Looking the wrong way at someone of superior position, you guessed it, flogging, possibly followed by branding with hot iron so everyone knows you're an authority questioner. But flogging is for minor infractions. For more serious crimes, like stealing food when you're literally starving to death, punishments become truly creative. Cutting off hands is popular and practical. It solves the theft problem permanently and serves as a visual example for other potential thieves. Branding faces with hot iron ensures the criminal is identifiable for the rest of their life, which admittedly tends to be quite short after this type of punishment. You're not prepared for this, but public executions are the main entertainment of the era. There's no Netflix theater or organized sports. Instead, when someone is going to be executed, everyone stops what they're doing and gathers in the main square to watch the spectacle. And what a spectacle! Depending on the crime and the executor's mood, you can watch simple hangings, elaborate decapitations, or more creative methods like being stretched until you break or burned alive. The crowd doesn't watch in respectful silence. Oh no, they actively participate, shouting suggestions, betting on how long the person will take to die, and occasionally throwing things at the condemned. Children are encouraged to watch so they learn about the consequences of inappropriate behavior. This was considered educational and morally edifying. Privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist. If you're a serf, you sleep in a room with a dozen other people, work in open fields where anyone can see everything you do, and have 0 moments alone during the entire day. If you're a soldier, you share cramped barracks with men who haven't washed in months and who snore like medieval chainsaws. If you're a noble, you have servants constantly around you, spies reporting every movement, and political meetings where every word is analyzed for hidden meanings. Even your physiological needs are public business. Remember the doorless necessary? Everyone can see, hear, and comment on your bodily functions. Developing constipation becomes a national security issue because your intestinal irregularity can be interpreted as a sign of illness, laziness, or even demonic possession. Violence isn't just accepted as a conflict resolution method, it's encouraged. 2 people disagree about something, fight. Someone insults your honor, duel. A peasant looks sideways at a noble, public beating. The law is clear. If you have superior social position, you can hit anyone of inferior position for practically any reason. And if you have inferior position, your only right is to be beaten silently and thank for the opportunity to serve as a punching bag. Nobles have developed particularly sophisticated ways of having fun at serfs' expense. Hunts where serfs are used as live bait to attract wild animals. Competitions where serfs are forced to fight each other for the entertainment of noble spectators. Games where serfs have to complete impossible tasks under penalty of severe physical punishment. There's also the special charm of courts of justice, where nobles decide the fate of people accused of crimes. The rules of evidence are simple. If you're accused, you're guilty, unless you can prove your innocence through methods like carrying red-hot iron with bare hands. If you don't get burned, God is on your side. Or being thrown in a lake. If you float, you're a witch. If you sink and die, you are innocent. Your work never ends because there are always more fields to plow, more stones to carry, more conflicts to fight, more politics to navigate. And when you finally stop working, it's not because you finished your tasks, but because it's literally too dark to continue or because you fainted from exhaustion. There are no weekends. Sunday was technically a rest day, but rest means going to mandatory Mass, where a priest who can barely read shouts about your sins for several hours, then returning home to fix broken equipment, care for sick animals, or perform other light tasks that are actually just disguised work. Holidays exist, theoretically, but are mainly excuses for nobles to organize elaborate festivals where serfs work even harder preparing food, decorations, and entertainment for people who despise them. You might even be authorized to watch the festivities as long as you maintain respectful distance and don't forget you're only there to serve. And here's the cruelest part. You do all this knowing there will never be improvement. There's no upward social mobility. If you were born a serf, you'll die a serf. If your parents were poor, you'll be poor. Your children will be poor. Your Children's children will be poor. The idea that hard work leads to success is a fantasy that won't be invented for many centuries. Good luck with your productivity. The day has barely begun, and you're already contemplating whether throwing yourself from the top of the castle walls would be a reasonable way to solve your career problems. But wait, there's still lunch to face. And after what you just experienced at breakfast, you really don't want to know what awaits you in the next meal. After hours of forced labor under scorching sun or freezing rain, your body is sending worrying signals. Back pain that seems to have become permanent, a cough that produces interesting colored substances, and a skin rash that definitely wasn't there yesterday. Time to seek medical help. What an absolutely terrible idea. Welcome to the fascinating world of medieval medicine, where the cure is statistically more dangerous than the disease, and where doctor is a title anyone can assume as long as they possess sufficient confidence and an impressive collection of sharp instruments of dubious origin. You're not prepared for this. The castle's physician is a man who learned his profession through a combination of ancestral superstition, casual observation of dying patients, and formal education that consisted mainly of memorizing ancient texts written by people who also had no idea what they were doing. He wears a pointed hat to seem wiser and carries a leather bag full of instruments that make you question whether you're seeking medical treatment or being prepared for medieval torture. Your first encounter with cutting-edge medicine of the era begins with a revolutionary diagnosis: urine analysis. No, they don't test it in a sophisticated laboratory. The doctor literally examines your urine by looking at it, smelling it, and occasionally, prepare yourself for this, tasting it. Yes, tasting. He dips a finger in your urine and licks it to determine what's wrong with you. This was considered scientific and accurate. He murmurs knowingly, grimacing after tasting your morning pee. Too salty. Definitely an imbalance of bodily humors. We'll need to drain the bad blood immediately. Ah, yes, the famous four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Every disease is caused by an imbalance of these bodily fluids, and the solution is always the same: remove what's in excess until you feel better or die trying. Bloodletting is the penicillin of the Middle Ages, universal solution for every imaginable medical problem. Headache, bloodletting; fever, bloodletting; broken leg, bloodletting; depression, obviously bloodletting; complicated pregnancy, you guessed it, bloodletting. The logic is impeccable. If you have too much blood, removing some should solve the problem. If you have too little blood, well, at least you won't suffer for long. The preferred instrument for this procedure is a rusty razor that has already been used on dozens of other patients, without ever being properly cleaned. The doctor makes cuts on your arm, wrist, or neck, depending on your type of imbalance, and lets the blood gush into a wooden bowl that has suspicious stains from previous procedures. Alternatively, he might use leeches, small viscous creatures that attach to your skin and suck your blood with impressive efficiency. The leeches live in stagnant water that smells like something died in it long ago, and they're reused on multiple patients because, after all, why waste precious medical resources? The fact that this spreads diseases among patients is a concept that won't be discovered for a few centuries. You lie on the surgery table, a wooden plank stained with blood and other substances, while liters of your blood are methodically drained until you're pale, dizzy, and questioning whether the original pain wasn't preferable to the cure. "Perfect," announces the doctor when you're almost fainting. Now the humors are balanced. You should feel much better. But wait, maybe your condition requires surgery. What an exciting adventure. Medieval surgery is performed without anesthesia because anesthesia hasn't been invented yet. Instead, you get a wooden stick to bite and several people to hold you down while someone cuts your body open with instruments that were forged by the local blacksmith and never properly sterilized. The operating room is any available flat surface, frequently the same table where food is prepared. Surgical instruments include kitchen knives, carpenter's saws adapted for medical use, and occasionally small axes for more dramatic amputations. Everything is covered by a patina of dried blood and organic tissue from previous procedures. The surgeon, who might also be the local butcher when not practicing medicine, works by candlelight, which means half the procedure happens in semi-darkness. His hands are dirty, obviously, because the concept of sterilization is completely unknown. In fact, dirty. Hands are considered a sign of medical experience. The more accumulated dirt, the more operations the surgeon has performed. Amputations are particularly popular because they're relatively simple to perform and definitively solve any problem in the affected extremity. Infected foot, cut off the leg, injured hand, cut off the arm, persistent toothache. Well, technically, they don't cut off the head, but they pull out all teeth with rusty pliers, which ultimately has the same practical effect. The saw used for amputations has already cut wood, animal bones, and occasionally was loaned for construction projects when no patients were available. During the procedure, you can hear your own bones being sawed while the surgeon casually converses with assistants about the weather, recent harvests, or other interesting amputations he's recently performed. Cauterization, burning the wound with hot iron to seal it, is the preferred method for controlling bleeding. The iron is heated in the same fire used to cook food and frequently has remnants of other substances stuck to it. The sound of your own tissue sizzling and the smell of your own flesh burning create a sensory experience you'll never forget, assuming you survive long enough to form memories. For mental illnesses or problems that can't be easily cut, medieval medicine offers therapeutic exorcism. Persistent headache, obviously demonic possession, epilepsy. Clearly, the devil is making you dance. Depression, your sins have attracted evil spirits. Treatment involves a priest shouting in Latin while throwing holy water at you and occasionally hitting you with a wooden cross to expel demons. Exorcisms can last hours or days, depending on the severity of possession. You're tied to a bed while multiple religious people take turns shouting prayers, burning incense that makes you cough uncontrollably, and performing rituals that involve surprising amounts of therapeutic physical violence. Medicinal herbs are widely used, but knowledge about which plants cure versus which plants kill is surprisingly limited. The local herbalist, frequently an elderly woman with knowledge passed down through generations, has an impressive collection of plants, roots, and fungi that she administers based mainly on intuition and trial and error. Some medicinal herbs are actually highly toxic. Belladonna for vision problems can leave you permanently blind. Hemlock for abdominal pain can cause deadly paralysis. Hallucinogenic mushrooms for mental clarity can make you spend your last moments of life convinced you're flying or transforming into an animal. Herb preparation happens under conditions that would make a modern laboratory close immediately for safety violations. Plants are dried in humid environments where they develop interesting fungi, ground with instruments also used to prepare food and rat poison, and mixed with substances like fermented urine, animal manure, and occasionally human blood to potentiate effects. Pills and potions are created by combining multiple toxic substances, hoping they'll neutralize each other or at least produce interesting effects before killing you. A popular recipe for general pain includes opium, addictive, mercury, poisonous, lead, lethal, and various herbs that individually would already be sufficient to cause serious health problems. Doctors also practice pioneering brain surgery, mainly trepanation, making holes in the skull with manual drills to release evil pressures. The procedure is performed with you fully conscious, using tools that resemble medieval torture equipment which isn't coincidental because they're frequently exactly the same thing. Medieval obstetrics is particularly adventurous. Women in labor receive potions that accelerate childbirth but can also cause fatal hemorrhages. Obstetric instruments include iron hooks to help stubborn babies come out, frequently resulting in serious injuries to both mother and child. Midwives work in completely unhygienic conditions, using the same hands that just delivered a dead baby to help with the next birth. Dentistry consists mainly of pulling out painful teeth with crude tools and no pain relief. The dentist, usually the local blacksmith, uses pliers, hammers, and occasionally chisels to remove problematic teeth along with significant pieces of surrounding jaw. Post-procedure infections are so common they're considered a normal part of the healing process. The survival rate for any medical procedure is statistically insignificant. Most patients die, not from the original condition, but from the treatment. Infections, poisoning from medications, excessive blood loss, and traumatic shock are much more common causes of death than the diseases that brought people to the doctor originally. Medical records consist mainly of lists of patients who died during treatment, organized by method of death instead of original disease. Excessive bloodletting, 23 deaths this month. Herb poisoning, 31 deaths. Post-surgical infection, 47 deaths. Fatal exorcism, 12 deaths. The cruel irony is that many medieval medical conditions would heal themselves if left alone. But leaving nature to take its course isn't profitable or impressive, so doctors intervene aggressively with treatments that guarantee minor conditions quickly become fatal. Congratulations, you survived the medical consultation, for now. But considering you just got bled nearly to unconsciousness, poisoned with toxic herbs, and possibly operated on with dirty instruments, your long-term survival chances have decreased significantly. Good luck with recovery. You're going to need all the luck possible, especially since now it's lunchtime, and your weakened digestive system is about to face another medieval culinary adventure. Your stomach is making sounds that resemble a combination of wild animal growling and a distress call in Morse code. After the traumatic medical experience you just survived, and use the term survived with cautious optimism, your weakened body is desperately asking for fuel. What perfect timing for the second gastronomic adventure of the day. Spoiler, you still haven't learned anything from breakfast. The castle bell rings announcing lunchtime, a sound that should be comforting, but in your current situation, sounds more like an alarm siren. You stagger toward the main hall, still dizzy from recent blood loss, and notice that the people around you seem genuinely excited about the prospect of eating again. This should be a warning sign, but your oxygen-deprived brain isn't processing information adequately. The castle kitchen is a spectacle that will permanently redefine your understanding of food safety. It's an environment where hygiene went to die, and where every surface tells a story of culinary horror. The walls are covered by a layer of grease and soot accumulated over decades, creating a shiny patina that reflects firelight almost artistically. The smell is an olfactory symphony that combines burning meat, rancid fat, human sweat, and something that definitely died quite some time ago in some dark corner. The cooks, and use the term generously, are people who learned their art through trial and error, mostly error. The head cook is a man with 3 fingers on his right hand. The other 2 were lost in culinary accidents. A scar that goes from ear to chin, another accident, and a productive cough that he doesn't bother covering while working over food. His hands are permanently dirty with a mixture of ingredients, dried blood, and substances you prefer not to identify. He's preparing the main course, meat. But what meat exactly? Good question. The animal of origin is a mystery that may never be solved. It might have been cow, pig, goat, horse, or something more exotic that died nearby and was considered salvageable. The meat has a color that doesn't exist in the natural palate, a greenish tone with purple spots that suggest the decomposition process was already well advanced when someone decided it was still good enough for consumption. You're not prepared for this, but medieval conservation technique is fascinating in its brutal simplicity. When an animal dies from natural causes, disease, accident, or occasionally for reasons nobody questions much, it's immediately processed, even if immediately means a few days later when someone finally notices the smell. The meat is then hung in open environment without refrigeration until it develops an interesting external crust that theoretically should preserve the interior. The result is meat that has the texture of old leather and a flavor that defies description. Imagine licking a shoe sole that was left in the sun for weeks, seasoned with notes of rotten fish and finished with a subtle touch of existential despair. To make this palatable, the cooks developed an ingenious strategy. Spices, many spices, all available spices simultaneously. Spices aren't used to enhance flavors. They're used as a culinary cover-up operation. Pepper in sufficient quantity to cause permanent nasal damage, garlic in proportions that would make vampires faint, and diverse herbs that may or may not be hallucinogenic are poured over the meat in a desperate attempt to mask the fact that you're essentially eating seasoned carrion. Salt. Precious salt. It's literally more valuable than gold, which means it's used with extreme parsimony, reserved only for special occasions or for people too important to die publicly from poisoning. For the rest of you, meat preservation depends on more creative methods, like letting it dry until it becomes natural jerky or burying it in the ground until it develops its own bacterial ecosystem. While observing meal preparation, you notice interesting movement on the kitchen's periphery. Rats. Not one or two lost rats, but a thriving population of rodents that clearly consider the kitchen their permanent residence. They circulate freely among the ingredients, occasionally stopping to taste things, leaving small organic gifts, and generally participating in the culinary process as unofficial team members. The cooks don't just tolerate the rats, they practically coexist in harmony. Quality control, explains a kitchen assistant when you point to a particularly brave rat that's literally sitting in the spice bowl. If rats eat it, it's safe. For humans, the logic is impeccable, except for the part where rats eat literally anything, including poison, garbage, and other dead rats. The vegetables available for lunch tell their own stories of agricultural adventure. They're grown in fields fertilized exclusively with human and animal manure, a sustainable practice that ensures every carrot, every cabbage, every onion comes pre-seasoned with an interesting variety of intestinal parasites and pathogenic bacteria. The vegetables are harvested when they're ripe, a term that apparently includes partially rotted and with interesting holes made by insects. The salad, yes, they serve salad, consists of green leaves that were washed in the same water used to wash dishes, clothes, and occasionally people. The leaves have a slightly viscous texture and small dark spots that could be dirt, could be insects, or could be something completely different that you genuinely don't want to investigate more deeply. Lunch bread is technically the same bread from breakfast, but now with a few additional hours to harden until reaching the consistency of medieval brick. Some people have developed sophisticated techniques to make it edible, including soaking it in any available liquid for enough time to soften, or simply swallowing small pieces without chewing, as if they were particularly large and rough pills. The cook responsible for vegetables, a woman with visible signs of leprosy on her hands and face, works cheerfully cutting ingredients with knives that are also used for other less culinary purposes. Her open wounds occasionally drip into what she's preparing, adding a personal touch to the recipe that you really would have preferred not to notice. You sit at the communal table and receive your portion, a wooden plate, not your personal plate obviously, with a generous amount of meat of questionable origin, some vegetables that seem to have lost a battle against nature, and bread that could be used as an improvised weapon. All of this is swimming in a puddle of fat that was solid when hot, but is now cooling to a consistency reminiscent of petroleum jelly with suspended particles. The person beside you starts eating with apparent enthusiasm, chewing with wet sounds that suggest they found something particularly interesting in the food. Fly larvae, she explains cheerfully, holding something small and white between her teeth, adds texture. She swallows and continues eating as if it were the most normal thing in the world. You try to cut the meat with the communal knife, the same one just used by someone with open wounds on their hands, and discover that the meat has the consistency of vulcanized rubber. Each cut produces a sound reminiscent of leather being torn. When you finally manage to separate a piece small enough to put in your mouth, the sensory experience is memorable. The initial flavor is salt and spices in sufficient quantity to cause damage to taste buds. Then comes the flavor of the meat itself, which is like chewing something that has been dead for a considerable time. There are interesting textures, harder parts that might be cartilage, softer parts that might be decomposed fat, and occasionally something that crunches between teeth alarmingly. Swallowing requires considerable courage and multiple attempts. The meat passes through the throat like a rough piece of rope, leaving a residual taste that suggests you just ate something that shouldn't be on the menu of living creatures. Your stomach receives this gastronomic gift with audible and immediate protest. The vegetables aren't better. The carrot tastes like dirt mixed with something organic in decomposition. The cabbage is naturally fermented, producing flavors that make you question if plants can get drunk. The onions are so strong that making you cry is just the first of their side effects. They also make your eyes burn, your nose run, and your throat burn, as if you inhaled toxic vapors. Half the table develops digestive problems while still eating. Worrying intestinal sounds echo through the hall, accompanied by facial expressions that suggest deep regret. Some people run toward the necessary, creating a small, desperate crowd on the plank with a hole. You finish what you can swallow of your meal, approximately 1/3 of what was served, and wonder how long it will take for side effects to appear. The answer, you'll discover soon, is not long. Your digestive system, already weakened by blood loss and toxic morning medications, is about to face challenges that would make a healthy stomach surrender immediately. Food poisoning isn't a possibility in the medieval diet, it's a statistical inevitability. The only question is what type of poisoning you'll develop and how creative the symptoms will be. Explosive diarrhea, projectile vomiting, delirious fever, and hallucinations caused by fermented fungi are just some of the gastroenterological adventures awaiting you. Good luck with digestion. You're going to need all the luck possible, because besides the biological challenges your body is about to face, you still have to deal with the rest of the medieval day. And considering that castle politics is almost as toxic as the food, your survival until nightfall is becoming an increasingly risky bet. While your stomach protests violently against recent food choices, producing sounds reminiscent of an apocalyptic intestinal storm, you realize you need to navigate another charming aspect of medieval life, castle politics. And here's a crucial lesson that might save your life for approximately 5 minutes. In medieval politics, silence is suspicious, but speaking is also fatal. Good luck finding the middle ground that will keep you alive until dinner. You're sitting in the main hall trying to pretend you're not having a monumental digestive crisis when you notice that all conversations around you are conducted in low tones, full of meaningful pauses and nervous glances. This isn't collective paranoia, it's basic survival. Every word spoken aloud can be interpreted as treason, sedition, or worse yet, A personal opinion. The castle lord, a man who seems to have been carved from stone by an artist with anger issues, is sitting at the main table, observing everyone with eyes that have seen many executions and clearly wouldn't mind seeing a few more. Around him, lesser nobles compete silently to get his attention positively, which is extremely difficult considering that drawing any kind of attention can result in accusations of presumption, which in turn can result in creative and publicly humiliating punishments. You're not prepared for this, but even the act of observing is being observed. There is a complex hierarchy of who can look at whom for how long and with what kind of facial expression. Looking directly at someone of superior position can be interpreted as defiance. Not looking can be interpreted as disrespect. Looking too long is insubordination. Not looking long enough is lack of due attention. A nearby serf makes the fatal mistake of laughing at something someone whispered. The laughter, which lasted perhaps 2 seconds, echoes through the hall like a gunshot. Conversations stop. Everyone turns to locate the source of social disturbance. The serf immediately realizes he's committed an error of potentially lethal proportions. His face loses all color as he tries to become invisible, which is impossible when 50 pairs of eyes are focused on him like medieval spotlights. "Something amuses you?" asks the Lord, his voice cutting through silence like a blade. The question is formulated politely, but everyone in the hall knows it's a death sentence disguised as social curiosity. The serf opens and closes his mouth several times, like a fish out of water, trying to formulate a response that won't result in his immediate execution. No, my lord," he finally manages to stammer. I wasn't laughing at anything important." Monumental error. Suggesting he was laughing at something not important implies there's a hierarchy of importance in his mind, which means he's making independent judgments, which means he's thinking for himself, which is dangerously close to having personal opinions. Personal opinions are potential treason. "Ah," says the Lord, and in that single syllable you can hear the sound of a life being significantly shortened. You think some things are important and others not important. How interesting. And who decided you have the qualification to make these distinctions? The trap is perfectly set. Any answer will be interpreted as additional evidence of independent thinking. Saying he has no qualification is admitting he was acting incorrectly. Saying he has qualification is deadly presumption. Not responding is disrespect. The serf is in a situation where all options lead to the same destination, a public demonstration of why it's a bad idea to draw attention to yourself. You watch, fascinated by horror, as the Lord slowly stands up. When nobles stand up slowly, people generally die quickly. 30 lashes, he announces casually, as if commenting on the weather. Publicly, now, to remind everyone about the importance of not laughing. The serf is dragged outside by guards, and you can hear the first screams echoing through the courtyard before the door even closes completely. This was considered educational justice and socially beneficial. Lesson learned: facial expressions are a matter of national security, but the real political fun is just beginning. You realize that the nobles around the main table are involved in an elaborate conversational dance that would make modern diplomats cry with frustration. Each phrase is carefully constructed with multiple possible interpretations, each word chosen to be simultaneously respectful and protective against future accusations of treason. The weather is particularly interesting today, comments one noble, and you can feel tension increase immediately. Interesting can mean anything. It could be subtle criticism of the Lord's decisions. It could be commentary on recent political events. It could be code for "I'm planning to assassinate you," or it could genuinely be about the weather, but even that's suspicious, because why would anyone make small talk when they could be demonstrating absolute loyalty? Yes, responds another noble carefully. Very educational. Now educational enters the conversational minefield. Educational for whom? About what? Who's being educated? Why is education necessary? Each word adds layers of possible treason to the conversation. The Lord observes this exchange with interest that doesn't bode well for anyone involved. He's clearly mentally cataloging who said what, looking for patterns of disloyalty or evidence of conspiracy. In medieval politics, three people conversing about any subject automatically constitute a potential conspiracy. You try to remain invisible, but total invisibility is impossible when you're sharing a table with professionally paranoid people. A nearby noble makes eye contact with you. What a terrible mistake. Now you're involved in the web of suspicions. He can't simply ignore you after making eye contact because that would be rude. But talking to you can be interpreted as an attempt to recruit you for conspiracy. And you, he finally says, his voice carefully neutral, what do you think of today? Perfect trap. Expressing any opinion about anything is dangerous. Not expressing an opinion when directly asked is disrespect. Trying to change the subject suggests you have something to hide. Responding honestly might reveal treacherous thoughts. Lying is a sin, and sins can be interpreted as evidence of moral corruption, which can lead to accusations of heresy. It's a day, you finally respond, choosing absolute neutrality as a survival strategy. But even this is problematic. Why are you being evasive? What are you trying to hide? Why can't you give a direct opinion about a simple day? The conversation around the table stops completely. Everyone is now paying attention to your response, looking for signs of treason, heresy, or simply bad attitude. The silence stretches for seconds that feel like hours, each person mentally calculating whether association with you might compromise their own political safety. A day, repeats the Lord thoughtfully. Interesting perspective. All days are days. You have a very universal philosophy. The tone suggests that having universal philosophy might be interpreted as evidence of dangerous independent thinking, possibly influenced by foreign or heretical ideas. You realize you're sweating, despite the castle's constant cold. Sweat is interpreted as a sign of nervousness, and nervousness suggests guilt. Guilt implies crime. Crime results in punishment. You try not to sweat, but trying not to sweat makes you sweat more, creating an anxiety cycle that's clearly visible to observers trained in detecting signs of suspicious behavior. Castle politics operates according to simple principles. Everyone is guilty of something until proven dead. Loyalty must be constantly demonstrated through betrayal of other people. Trust is measured by willingness to denounce friends. Friendship is evidence of conspiracy. Loneliness is evidence of dangerous anti-socialism. Informants are everywhere. The servant who brings your food might be reporting your facial expressions during meals. The person who cleans your room is certainly looking for evidence of subversive activities like books, if you can read, which is suspicious by itself, personal letters, or objects that can be interpreted as symbols of alternative loyalties. Even your personal hygiene habits, or lack thereof, are monitored. Washing too frequently might suggest vanity, which can lead to pride, which can result in defiance of authority. Not washing suggests slovenliness, which can indicate lack of self-respect, which can extend to lack of respect for social hierarchy. There's no safe middle ground. Alliances change hourly based on rumors, interpretations of glances, and occasionally prophetic dreams of people who claim to have divine connections. The person who was your ally at breakfast might be your mortal enemy at lunch, depending on who said what to whom during the interval. Loyalties are as fluid as water and equally impossible to hold. Poison is an accepted and widely used political tool, not the obvious poison that kills instantly. That would be inconvenient and socially awkward. Political poison is administered in small doses over time, causing symptoms that can be attributed to natural diseases, demonic possession, or divine punishment for secret sins. Your wine might contain interesting substances. Your food might have seasonings that aren't exactly culinary. Even the air you breathe might be occasionally perfumed with vapors that cause interesting side effects. Paranoia is an essential survival skill, but demonstrating paranoia is evidence of conscious guilt. Torture as an investigation method is standard and accepted. If you're suspected of anything, you'll be questioned extensively using techniques designed to extract detailed confessions about crimes you may or may not have committed. Torture continues until you confess something, anything, that justifies the original suspicion. The interesting thing about confessions extracted through torture is that they always confirm investigators' suspicions, regardless of factual reality. If they suspect you're a foreign spy, you'll confess to being a foreign spy. If they suspect you're a heretic, you'll confess detailed heresy. If they suspect you're conspiring against the Lord, you'll provide names, dates, and specific conspiracy plans. Medieval justice operates according to the infallible logic that innocent people aren't tortured. Therefore, if you're being tortured, you must be guilty of something. If you resist torture for too long, this proves you have supernatural assistance, probably demonic, which is additional evidence of guilt. If you confess quickly, this proves your obvious guilt. If you die during torture, this is clearly divine punishment for your crimes. You wonder if there's any way to navigate this lethal political environment without dying violently. The answer is statistically unlikely. The life expectancy of people who get involved in medieval politics is measured in weeks, not years. Even people who try to avoid politics completely are eventually dragged into intrigues that result in accusations, that result in confessions, that result in public executions. And speaking of executions, you can hear preparations happening in the courtyard outside. Someone is building something wooden, possibly a gallows, possibly a pyre, possibly a more creative device for public entertainment. The sound of hammers hitting wood echoes through the castle walls like an ominous soundtrack to your current political situation. You're not prepared for this, but medieval politics isn't optional. Even trying to remain neutral, you're already involved simply by being present. Your presence is interpreted as tacit endorsement of whatever is happening. Your absence would be interpreted as silent protest. There's no safe position. Good luck navigating the shark-infested waters of castle politics. But maybe it's time to change subjects to something less deadly, like religion. Oh, wait, medieval religion is even more dangerous than politics. At least in politics, you can occasionally bribe your way out of trouble. With religion, your soul is at permanent risk, and souls don't accept bribes. You thought politics was scary? How adorably naive. Time to discover how medieval religion transformed faith into an experience that would make horror movies seem like children's cartoons. Prepare for a spiritual journey where salvation is statistically impossible and eternal damnation is practically guaranteed, regardless of what you do or don't do. The chapel bell echoes through the castle with urgency that suggests God isn't just watching you, but is particularly irritated today. Everyone stops what they're doing, which in your case is trying not to vomit the apocalyptic lunch, and heads obediently to mandatory Mass. Mandatory being the key word here, because not attending Mass isn't just impolite. It's prima facie evidence of heresy, which is punishable by methods that would make you beg to return to the simple days of public flogging. The chapel is an environment designed specifically to make you feel small, insignificant, and deeply guilty of crimes you didn't know you had committed. The stone walls rise to a height that suggests God is literally looking down, judging you, and finding you terribly inadequate. Colored, stained glass windows depict biblical scenes with particular emphasis on suffering, crucifixions, martyrdoms, divine tortures, and other edifying spiritual activities that serve as a preview of what awaits you in eternal life. The priest, a man who seems to have been carved from old wood by someone with limited understanding of human anatomy, has eyes that have seen many confessions and clearly weren't impressed by any of them. He speaks Latin with dubious fluency, but that doesn't matter because the important thing isn't understanding what he's saying, but adequately demonstrating your own spiritual inadequacy through painful genuflections and appropriate facial expressions of contrition. You're not prepared for this, but already in the first sentence of the sermon you discover that practically everything you've done in your life, including actions you considered neutral or even positive, are mortal sins that guarantee your eternal damnation. Waking up this morning, sin of sloth for not having woken up earlier, eating breakfast, sin of gluttony, trying to avoid eating larvae in the porridge, sin of ingratitude for divine gifts, surviving the medical experience, sin of pride for presuming you deserve to live. You are all sinners, announces the priest with genuine joy, as if sharing good news. You were born in sin, live in sin, and will die in sin, and those are just the sins you know you've committed. The sins you don't know you've committed are infinitely worse. What a comforting concept. There's an entire category of sins you're committing unconsciously, constantly, simply by existing. Breathing might be sin if you're breathing air that should go to holier people. Thinking might be sin if your thoughts aren't focused exclusively on divine contemplation. Not thinking is also sin, because that demonstrates mental laziness. There's no state of existence that isn't sinful in some way. The list of sins is impressively creative and comprehensive. Obvious sins like murder and theft are just the basic beginning. There are also more subtle sins: looking at someone of the opposite sex, lust; not looking when they speak to you, disrespect; smiling too much, frivolity; not smiling enough, impious melancholy; working on Sundays, Sabbath violation; not working enough on other days, sloth; eating too much, gluttony; eating too little, ingratitude for divine gifts. But wait, there's more. Sins of thought are particularly insidious because they happen constantly, without conscious control. Thinking you might not deserve all the misery you're suffering, sin of pride; thinking other people might be suffering more than you, sin of judgment; trying not to think about sins, sin of spiritual evasion; thinking too much about sins, sin of impious obsession. Confession is mandatory and public. You must admit all your sins before the entire community in specific details that make you question whether it wouldn't be better to simply confess crimes you didn't. Commit to make the process faster. But confessing false sins is also sin, so you're trapped in a theological trap with no exit. I have sinned, you begin hesitantly, using the standard formula, in thought, word, and deed. But this generic confession doesn't satisfy the priest, who wants painful and embarrassing specificity. What kind of sinful thoughts, he asks, his voice echoing through the chapel in a way that ensures everyone hears your answer? When exactly did you have these thoughts? How frequently? Did you try to resist? Why didn't you try harder? Did you enjoy having these sinful thoughts? Each question creates new opportunities for embarrassing revelations and confessions of spiritual inadequacy. Admitting anything is humiliating. Denying is lying, which is additional sin. Trying to explain context is making excuses, which demonstrates lack of true repentance. You're in a situation where any answer deepens your spiritual guilt. The penance assigned for your confessed sins is creative and uncomfortable. It might include prolonged fasting, which in your current nutritional situation might be literally fatal, repetitive prayers in painful physical positions, or pilgrimages to sacred places that are inconveniently distant and known for their high mortality rate among pilgrims. Self-flagellation is encouraged as a way to demonstrate spiritual sincerity. You receive a whip specially designed for personal use, not a professional whip like those used for official punishments, but a domestic whip you can use in the privacy of your own room to punish your sinful flesh. The idea is that physical pain purifies the soul, a theory that will later be discredited by people who better understand both pain and souls. Using the whip requires specific technique to be spiritually effective. Too light, and you're not demonstrating adequate repentance. Too strong, and you might seriously hurt yourself, which is sin of self-mutilation. The ideal speed, correct angle, and appropriate number of strikes are all specified in details that suggest someone spent considerable time developing the science of religious self-torture. Sacred relics are for sale everywhere, a thriving economy based on selling objects that supposedly have miraculous powers. Pieces of the true cross, apparently a very large cross considering how many pieces are in circulation. Hair from various saints, bones of martyrs, and occasionally preserved bodily fluids from important religious figures. The relic seller who visits the castle monthly has an impressive collection of portable miracles. This tooth, he explains, holding a yellowed object that may or may not be of human origin, belonged to St. Sebastian personally. It cures headaches, digestive problems, and impure thoughts. Only 2 gold coins. You don't have 2 gold coins, obviously, but he has options for more modest budgets. Holy water from the Jordan River, he offers, showing a bottle with suspicious brown liquid. Or if you prefer something more affordable, we have sacred earth from the place where St. Peter possibly stepped once. Buying relics is almost mandatory because not buying suggests lack of adequate faith. But buying too much suggests you're trying to buy your way to heaven, which is simony, which is sin. Buying wrong relics can indicate heresy. Buying right relics, but for wrong reasons, is also spiritually problematic. Witchcraft is the perfect crime because anything can be interpreted as evidence of malevolent supernatural activities. Knowing medicinal herbs, witchcraft, having strange dreams, demonic communication. Your domestic animals behave peculiarly. Diabolic familiars, you're particularly lucky or unlucky. Supernatural interference. There is no normal human behavior that can't be reinterpreted as witchcraft if someone wants to accuse you. The techniques for identifying witches are scientifically rigorous and absolutely infallible. If you float when thrown in water, you're a witch. If you sink and die, you were innocent, but at least now we know. If you confess under torture, you're obviously guilty. If you don't confess under torture, you have demonic help to resist pain, which is additional evidence of witchcraft. Exorcisms are performed regularly for a variety of problems that may or may not be of supernatural origin. Persistent headache, demonic possession, antisocial behavior, clearly satanic influence, questioning religious authority, definitely possession by heretical demons specialized in sowing theological doubt. The exorcism process involves hours of shouting in Latin, generous sprinkling of holy water, which may or may not be actually blessed, depending on the qualification and sobriety of the priest who blessed it, and occasionally therapeutic physical violence to expel evil spirits that apparently physically attach themselves to the possessed person's body. You watch an exorcism being performed on a woman who had the misfortune to publicly disagree with her husband about grain prices at the market. She's tied to a chair while 3 priests take turns shouting prayers and occasionally hitting her with wooden crosses to awaken her spiritual consciousness. She screams back, but this is interpreted as demons speaking through her, justifying even more aggressive treatment. Heresy is defined so broadly that practically anything can qualify. Asking questions about religious doctrine. Intellectual heresy, not asking enough questions. heresy of spiritual indifference, demonstrating too much religious knowledge, heresy of theological pride, demonstrating too little knowledge, heresy of voluntary ignorance. The Inquisition, an organization dedicated exclusively to finding heretics wherever they might be hiding, which apparently is everywhere, has particularly effective methods for extracting heresy confessions. They operate according to the simple principle that everyone is a heretic until proven orthodox, and orthodoxy can only be proven through detailed confession of specific heresies, followed by adequately demonstrated repentance. Religious superstitions govern every aspect of daily life. Can't cut nails on Sundays, can't look in mirrors during storms, must make the sign of the cross before eating, after eating, when entering any environment, when leaving any environment, when seeing any black animal, and approximately every 5 minutes during the day for general spiritual safety. Amulets and protections are necessary, but also dangerous. Carrying Christian symbols is mandatory, but carrying too many might suggest you don't have enough faith to trust natural divine protection. Not carrying enough is obviously tempting the devil. Carrying wrong symbols can indicate heresy. Carrying right symbols but incorrectly is also problematic. God, you're regularly informed, hates you. Personally, He created you specifically to suffer as a demonstration of His divine justice. Any moment of happiness or comfort you experience is a mistake that will be corrected through additional suffering. Your entire life is a test you're destined to fail, and the failure will be punished with eternal torment that will make your earthly experience seem like a relaxing vacation. Good luck maintaining your mental sanity while navigating this environment of constant spiritual terror. But at least now it's dinner time, your last meal of the day, which statistically might be your last meal ever, considering that every aspect of medieval life seems designed to kill you in one way or another, and after everything you've been through today, the idea of dying during dinner is beginning to seem almost comforting. The castle bell announces dinner with solemnity that suggests this might very well be your last earthly meal, a possibility that, considering the day's apocalyptic events, is becoming statistically more probable with each passing hour. Your body, already traumatized by medical bloodletting, food poisoning, political terror, and spiritual anguish, is sending contradictory signals, desperate hunger competing with existential nausea. Good luck reconciling these sensations. You stagger toward the main hall, noticing that several people who were present at lunch are now mysteriously absent. This could mean they died from food poisoning, were executed for political infractions, or simply gave up on life and threw themselves from the castle walls. Any of these options would be understandable given the day everyone has had. The communal table, that marvel of medieval social engineering, is set for what promises to be a gastronomic experience that will make lunch seem like a royal banquet. The dark wood of the table has archaeological layers of stains that tell the story of thousands of previous meals. Blood from questionable meats, crystallized fat from past eras, spilled wine that fermented directly in the wood, and less identifiable substances that formed an artistic patina of civilization in decline. You're not prepared for this, but dinner hierarchy is even crueler than during other meals. The high table, where nobles sit, is literally elevated on a platform that allows them to observe serfs eating, or trying to eat, at the lower tables. It's like a Roman amphitheater, but instead of gladiators fighting, it's hungry people competing for scraps. The nobles are already seated, adorned in clothes that cost more than entire families. Annual income, delicately chewing meats that were prepared by cooks who know the difference between rare and rotten. Their plates are individual, made of precious metal, and their food has been tasted by people specially trained to die in their place if anything is poisoned. Meanwhile, you sit on a wooden plank that serves as a collective bench sharing space with people who are clearly in various stages of social and physical decomposition. The person beside you is coughing up blood in what seems to be the rhythm of a macabre song. On the other side, someone is rocking back and forth, murmuring what might be prayers or might be confessions of horrible crimes. It's hard to distinguish. The food arrives carried by servants who seem to have survived a war, which they actually have, considering that working in a medieval kitchen is essentially daily combat against hostile forces of decomposition and contamination. They carry enormous wooden trays that groan under the weight of substances that technically qualify as food, but defy normal biological categorization. Tonight's main course is something that was once an animal, multiple animals actually, because apparently someone decided that if you're going to serve dubious meat, you might as well combine several dubious meats into a truly memorable culinary experience. The result is a protein mass that has varied textures, some parts hard as leather, others viscous like jelly, and some areas that seem to be moving independently. The preparation technique involved leaving this multi-origin meat hanging in open environment until it developed its own bacterial ecosystem, then cooking it over fire fed by diverse organic substances until the surface became carbonized, while the interior remained in a state that defies description. The seasoning consists of all available spices applied simultaneously in a desperate attempt to mask the fact that you're essentially eating gourmet carrion. But here's where dinner becomes truly interesting. There are no individual plates for people of your social class. All food is dumped directly onto the table, creating a communal buffet where everyone eats from the same surface, using the same dirty hands that just finished being used for other less sanitary activities. You observe, fascinated by horror, as dozens of hands simultaneously dive into the communal food. Hands with open wounds, hands with missing fingers, hands that clearly haven't been washed since the last Ice Age. Each person grabs what they can, using techniques that vary from civilized to completely primitive, depending on their level of hunger versus their remaining level of human dignity. The competition for food quickly becomes Darwinian. Faster people get the best parts, which is a relative term when dealing with meat that was already questionable to begin with. Slower people are left with pieces rejected by others, which might include parts with particularly suspicious textures or colors that shouldn't exist in nature. A fight breaks out on the other side of the table when two people simultaneously grab the same piece of meat. The argument quickly escalated from verbal dispute to physical violence, with people literally fighting over food while continuing to chew. Nobody intervenes because everyone is busy protecting their own portion of questionable sustenance. The person who was coughing up blood earlier is now coughing directly over the shared food, adding a personal touch of contamination to the collective gastronomic experience. This was considered normal and inevitable. Concepts like covering your mouth or moving away from food when sick won't exist for many centuries. Vegetables are present, technically speaking. They're the same vegetables from lunch, but now with a few additional hours of deterioration at room temperature. The carrots have developed an interesting viscous film. The cabbage has naturally fermented, producing gases that make you question whether vegetables can get drunk. The onions are so pungent they make your eyes water copiously, which is actually a blessing because tears help wash some irritants from the air. Wild dogs, and when I say wild, I mean they've abandoned any pretense of domestication and returned to primitive state, circle the tables like hungry vultures. They don't wait politely for scraps. They actively compete with humans for food, occasionally jumping onto the table to steal pieces directly from people's hands. A particularly brave cat, or possibly desperate, is literally sitting in the middle of the communal food, eating peacefully, while people around try to eat around it. Nobody attempts to remove the cat because, honestly, it has as much right to the food as any person present. and is probably in better health condition than most human diners. Rats run openly across the table during the meal, not bothering at all with human presence. Some are bold enough to steal food directly from people's plates. Others simply relieve themselves in the shared food and continue their rodent activities. This is accepted as a natural part of the medieval dining process. Tonight's bread has reached levels of hardness that defy physics laws. It's more stone than food product, requiring specialized techniques for consumption. Some people try to break it with rocks, others use it as a hammer to break other foods. The most desperate simply suck small pieces until they soften enough to be swallowed like giant rough pills. Alcohol is the only comforting constant in all this experience. Tonight's beer has a particularly interesting flavor, as if it had been fermented in barrels that previously contained other less palatable substances. It has the color of muddy water and slightly oily texture, but the alcohol is sufficient to partially anesthetize your consciousness of the culinary horrors around you. You drink generously because alcohol is literally the only way to make this experience tolerable. Other people around the table have the same idea, resulting in a table full of progressively drunker people trying to eat progressively more repugnant food. The combination produces predictable results. Vomiting becomes a regular part of the dining experience. People simply turn their heads and vomit on the floor or occasionally on the table, and then continue eating as if nothing happened. Dogs immediately appear to clean up the vomit, creating a natural cleaning system that is simultaneously efficient and deeply disturbing. Digestion becomes an epic challenge. Your stomach, already traumatized by the day's previous culinary experiences, receives this new assault with audible and immediately perceptible protests. Worrying intestinal sounds echo through the hall like a sinister orchestra of digestive systems in collective rebellion. Intestinal gases are produced in industrial quantities, creating an atmosphere that was already questionable and transforming it into something genuinely toxic. Nobody bothers being discreet, because discretion is impossible when everyone is having the same apocalyptic digestive experience simultaneously. People start leaving the table not because they finished eating, but because their bodies are rebelling in ways that require immediate attention at the necessary. A small crowd forms toward the communal bathroom, creating a desperate line of people with various digestive urgencies. The nobles at the high table observe this spectacle with evident entertainment. For them, watching serfs suffering with bad food is a form of nightly entertainment. They occasionally make comments among themselves, laughing discreetly at the digestive despair of the lower classes. This was considered appropriate humor and socially acceptable. You realize several people have simply stopped eating and are just sitting, rocking slightly, with expressions suggesting they're contemplating mortality. Some might actually be dying. It's hard to distinguish between extremely uncomfortable and in process of death, when everyone seems to be in similar state of physical misery. The meal ends not because the food ran out, but because people stop being able to eat. Significant leftovers remain on the table, but nobody has the courage or physical capacity to continue. Dogs, cats, and rats immediately take control of the situation, transforming the end of human dinner into the beginning of animal dinner. You try to stand up and discover your legs are curiously unstable. This might be due to morning blood loss, progressive food poisoning, alcohol, or simply the cumulative weight of an entire day of physical and psychological trauma. It's probably a combination of all these factors. As you stagger toward the exit, you hear worrying sounds coming from various directions. People vomiting, people crying, people making sounds that might be prayers or might be last confessions. The general environment suggests not everyone is going to survive the night. Good luck digesting this final meal. Your chances of waking up tomorrow have decreased significantly with each bite you manage to swallow. But at least now it's time to try to sleep, assuming you can reach your bed without collapsing in the corridor and assuming your bed isn't occupied by something that died during the day. The medieval day is finally coming to an end. You survived so far. But night is just beginning, and medieval nights have their own special horrors that will make you question whether surviving to this point was really a victory or simply prolonged agony. The medieval day is officially coming to an end, and you're standing in the castle's frozen corridor, swaying slightly due to the toxic combination of blood loss, multiple food poisoning, political terror, spiritual anguish, and questionable alcohol. Your intestines are producing a symphony of protests that echoes through the stone walls like the lament of a tormented soul. It's time to try to sleep. What an absolutely terrible idea. You navigate the dark corridors using a technique that combines muscle memory, survival instinct, and pure luck. The only illumination comes from occasional torches that crackle threateningly, projecting dancing shadows that make every alcove seem to harbor potential assassins. The wind howls through cracks in the stones, creating sounds that vary between ghostly moans and demonic laughter. Romantic, isn't it? Each step echoes with authority you definitely don't possess, alerting any person or thing in the vicinity about your approximate location. This is problematic considering you spent the entire day accumulating political enemies, irritated religious heretics, and generally demonstrating your social inadequacy in multiple spheres of medieval life. Being easily locatable in the dark isn't strategically advantageous. You finally reach your room, that generous description of a space that's basically a cell with architectural pretensions, and discover your first nighttime surprise. Your bed is occupied. Not by a person, which would be socially awkward but manageable. It's occupied by something that might have been a person at some point in the recent past, but is now in a state that defies precise biological classification. You're not prepared for this, but apparently someone decided to use your bed as temporary storage for a body that's in various stages of decomposition. It might be someone who died during the day, from natural causes, food poisoning, political execution, divine punishment, or simply existential resignation. It might be someone who was murdered and temporarily stored until a more permanent disposal location is found. Or it might be someone who's just very sick and chose your bed as a place to die with dignity. Regardless of the exact situation, you need a place to sleep, and removing bodies isn't technically your professional responsibility. After a moment of ethical contemplation, you decide that sharing a bed with a cadaver isn't significantly worse than any other experience you've had today. At least cadavers don't snore, don't steal blankets, and don't have controversial political opinions. You gently push the body to one side of the bed. It's surprisingly rigid, which simplifies the logistical process, and lie down in the available space. The straw that serves as a mattress is now damp with fluids of questionable origin, but damp is a standard condition for practically all surfaces in the castle, so it doesn't represent a significant change in your living conditions. Medieval nighttime cold is a force of nature that seems to have been designed specifically to extract any trace of body heat through methods that defy thermodynamics laws. The stone walls don't just fail to retain heat, they actively radiate coldness that penetrates through any clothing, blanket, or illusion of comfort you might have. You pull over yourself what can generously be called a blanket, a collection of sewn rags that might once have had identifiable color, but now represents an artistic palette of brown, gray, and occasionally red stains. The blanket smells of all the bodies that have slept under it, a collective fragrance of unwashed humanity that would make professional perfumers faint. But at least you have company. The fleas that call your bed home are particularly active tonight, possibly stimulated by the arrival of a new body to colonize. They organize exploratory expeditions across your entire body's surface, establishing new territories, and apparently communicating their discoveries through bites that create an itch that can be felt down to the bones. You try to settle into a position that minimizes contact with the cadaver beside you while maximizing your area under the infected blanket. It's a complex geometry problem involving physical considerations: where to put arms and legs, survival tactics, how to maintain distance from suspicious bodily fluids, and existential questions. Whether it's worth trying to sleep when waking up might be statistically unlikely. Nighttime sounds begin almost immediately. The castle apparently comes to life after nightfall, producing a symphony of noises that would transform insomnia into comparative blessing. Rats run through the walls with enthusiasm, suggesting they're organizing some kind of rodent festival. Somewhere distant, someone is crying with despair that echoes through stone corridors like nightmare soundtrack. Occasionally you hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside, guards patrolling, assassins looking for victims, or possibly ghosts of people who died in the castle and can't find the exit. The footsteps stop periodically outside your door, as if whoever it is were considering entering to investigate room occupants. After moments that seem like eternities, the footsteps continue, leaving you wondering whether you escaped something terrible or if something terrible simply decided to return later. Occasional screams pierce the night. They might be people being tortured in the dungeons. They might be people having particularly vivid nightmares, or they might be people discovering things in their rooms they'd rather not have found, like cadavers in their beds, for example. You wonder how many other people are having nighttime experiences similar to yours. Your stomach continues its digestive rebellion with renewed enthusiasm. The combination of rotten meat, fermented vegetables, questionable alcohol, and existential stress created an intestinal storm that produces sounds audible through stone walls. You hope patrolling guards interpret the noises as something supernatural instead of gastroenterological, because explaining digestive problems might be more embarrassing than being suspected of ghostly activities. Sleep attempts are sabotaged by a variety of physical and psychological factors. Physically, you're uncomfortable at levels that will permanently redefine your understanding of the word discomfort. Psychologically, you're processing an entire day of traumas that would make modern therapists cry and quit the profession. You close your eyes and immediately begin reliving the day's highlights: breakfast with larvae dancing in porridge, medical bloodletting session that almost killed you in the name of healing, lunch where you ate meat that might have been domestic pet, deadly politics where laughter almost resulted in public, execution, terrifying religion, where you discovered practically everything you do is mortal sin, and dinner, where you competed with wild animals for food that shouldn't be consumed by living beings. Each memory is accompanied by sensory details your brain insists on replaying with painful precision. The taste of urine when the doctor sampled your pee for diagnosis, the smell of rotten meat masked by spices, the sound of your own ribs being counted during excessive bloodletting, the feel of fleas establishing permanent colonies in your hair follicles. Sleep, when it finally comes, brings nightmares that are comparative improvement with reality. You dream you're in a medieval castle where conditions are horrible and people constantly die from disease, hunger, political violence, and existential despair. Wait, this isn't a nightmare. It's accurate memory of the day you just lived. Apparently, your subconscious doesn't have enough imagination to create horrors worse than your actual experience. You wake up multiple times during the night, each time initially thinking you escaped the medieval castle and returned to civilization, only to realize you're still trapped in the same infested bed next to the same corpse, in the same stone room that smells like a combination of death, despair, and centuries of poor hygiene. Around what you estimate to be approximately 3 a.m., time measurement being approximate when you don't have clocks and the only indicators are changing. Patterns of sounds coming from various torture sessions. You hear something new. Scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. It might be particularly large rats. It might be people trapped between stones, slowly starving to death. It might be previous castle occupants who never managed to escape even after death. The scratching sounds move slowly along the wall, occasionally pausing directly behind where your head is resting. Whatever is making the sounds apparently knows exactly where. You're lying, which is either impressive tracking ability or deeply disturbing supernatural awareness. You decide not to investigate further because some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when you're trapped in a confined space with limited escape routes. By dawn, which you recognize by the subtle change in quality of cold air coming through the window hole, you estimate you managed maybe 2 hours of actual sleep, interrupted by digestive emergencies, nightmare recalls, paranoid, alertness every time you heard suspicious sounds, and general existential dread about having to repeat this entire experience tomorrow. You sit up carefully, trying not to disturb your cadaver roommate, and take inventory of your physical condition. Everything hurts, but that's been consistent since you woke up yesterday morning. You're probably malnourished, definitely dehydrated, possibly poisoned by multiple toxic substances, and certainly traumatized by experiences that would require therapy, techniques that won't be invented for many centuries. But here's the cruel irony. You survived one complete day in medieval life, and you're still, technically, alive. Your expectation was that you'd die horribly within hours, but instead you managed to navigate breakfast horrors, medical torture, political assassination attempts, religious terrorism, lunch poisoning, workplace exploitation, dinner contamination, and nighttime survival challenges. Congratulations. You survived your first day in medieval castle life. For now. But don't get too excited about this achievement, because now you have to do it all over again. Today. And tomorrow. And every day after that, until you die from something horrible, which statistically will happen soon. The reality is that medieval life isn't sustainable. It's designed to kill people efficiently through a combination of malnutrition, disease, violence, despair, and pure biological impossibility of surviving in conditions actively hostile to human existence. Most people don't last weeks. Some don't last days. Very few last years. You're playing a survival game where the rules constantly change, where success is measured by not dying today instead of any positive achievement, and where tomorrow will be exactly like today, except possibly worse, because your health and sanity are deteriorating with each experience. Next time you complain about your modern life, traffic jams, slow Wi-Fi, cold coffee, uncomfortable airplane seats, work meetings, that could have been emails. Remember your day in medieval castle. Remember the flea-infested straw bed sharing space with corpses. Remember drinking beer for breakfast because water could kill you. Remember eating larvae because protein is protein. Remember being medically tortured in the name of health care. But most importantly, remember that you didn't actually experience any of these things because you're living in an era of unprecedented comfort, safety, and opportunity compared to 99% of human history. Your worst modern day is infinitely better than an average day in medieval times. The truth is, you wouldn't last one day in an actual medieval castle. Nobody would. Modern humans are too soft, too dependent on technology, too accustomed to basic human rights like not being randomly tortured, not being forced to eat rotten meat, and not sharing beds with corpses. Congratulations, you didn't survive after all, as expected, because this whole experience was. Imagination and real medieval life was infinitely worse than anything described here. Real people lived and died in conditions that would break modern minds within hours. So next time you're tempted to romanticize simpler times or wish you could live like people used to, Remember that those people had life expectancy of approximately 30 years, spent their entire short lives in physical agony, and died horrible deaths from things that are easily treatable today. Your modern life, with all its minor inconveniences and first world problems, is literally paradise compared to medieval existence. You won the historical lottery by being born when and where you were born. Now stop complaining about your Wi-Fi and go appreciate running water, antibiotics, and the fact that nobody will execute you for laughing at the wrong time. Good night. Forever.